Welcome to the Cognitive Crucible, produced by the Information Professionals Association. Our website is information-professionals.org, where you can find links and information about today's conversation and get access to members-only content. Join John Bicknell and explore all aspects of our generational challenge, cognitive security.
Dr. Rand Waltzman is Deputy Chief Technology Officer at Rand Corporation. Previous positions include Acting CTO and Associate Director of Research of the Software Engineering Institute at Carnegie Mellon University, Program Manager at the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, Chief Scientist in the Distributed Systems Lab at Lockheed Martin, and Associate Professor of Computer Science at the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, Sweden. He started his career at the Teknowledge Corporation, the world's first commercial artificial intelligence company. He is also co-founder of the Information Professionals Association, or IPA. Rand Waltzman, welcome to the Cognitive Crucible.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, you are well known in the world of information warfare and information operations for coining the phrase cognitive security. Could you tell our audience a little bit more about how you came to that?
Well, the idea was to sort of, put it in opposition to the concept of cybersecurity. So it's an analogy, but it's for the other direction, right? So cybersecurity is really a technical thing. I mean, it's about defending or attacking the infrastructure or the box at the end of the infrastructure. I mean, that's really the cybersecurity part is about, and attacking and defending it in many different ways. Cognitive security is about doing the same thing except for the people at the end of the infrastructure, at the end of the box. So it's about manipulating people, and it's about defending people from manipulation, and studying the types of attacks that people do. So you have offensive type of cognitive attacks. So that was the main idea of it.
Right. So you're also well known for another phrase where you describe the problem of information and information warfare, fake news, all of these types of things that we're hearing so much about these days. You say it's like a chronic disease with no cure, however it may be managed. How do you support that claim?
Well, the idea behind that is that people are not going to change. People haven't changed in a very, very long time. And the characteristics of people that make them susceptible to manipulation, to emotional manipulation, to these types of cognitive attacks that I'm talking about, that is not going to change. So people will always be susceptible, no matter what you do, basically. I mean, we're sort of hardwired to be susceptible to these kinds of attacks. So that's why I say it's chronic. You can't stop it. You can't make it completely go away, but you can try to mitigate the effects. So that's what I mean by being managed. So it's like, it's like a disease, but you can't cure the disease, but you can manage the effects of it and you can keep it under control. So that's the idea, basically, that you should be able to keep this kind of manipulation, that vulnerability to manipulation, under control. And of course, you can discuss how might you do that, and there are many different ways to approach it. But that's the general idea. That's what really I meant by that phrase.
Right. Well, I certainly agree that people haven't changed. You'd have to go back a very long ways in time to have any meaningful changes in the way humans navigate the world. So what has changed recently that surfaces this problem so poignantly compared to 20 years ago, 100 years ago, even 1,000 years ago, if humans are relatively the same?
Scale. It's all about scale. You can do these types of attacks on an enormous scale that people didn't even dream about before. I mean, if you look at, take an example like Joseph Goebbels, right? He was the guy, propaganda minister of the Nazi Reich. When he was confronted with the idea of television, I mean, in the 1930s, it's actually quite remarkable. The German telephone company was actually starting to lay cables for video phones. As remarkable as that sounds, this
Wow.
is that we're doing that. But Goebbels didn't see it. He didn't get it. He said, well, that doesn't sound interesting. Because what he really wanted was today what would be the equivalent of a jumbotron. He wanted a gigantic screen. Because in his mind, the way you got to people was through massive rallies. Okay, the idea of communications over distances, it wasn't, okay, he bought into radio and he bought into other things, but that you should have to be able to do sort of personalized, customized, communications to get at people, that was too far out of his thinking. But that's what's different today. Today, with the information environment as it is, we're in an age of mass customization of messaging.
Mm-hmm.
We can using automatic techniques, we can do massive scale audience segmentation to any level we want and along any lines we want. We can then customize messaging to resonate in a maximum way with each of those segmented audiences. And we can do this at scale. And not only that, but you could do it really fast, right? And in the old days, it took time for things to get out. It took time for messages to propagate. But now you can get stuff out just, in a blink of an eye. So the sort of arbitrary expansion of spatial extent and the arbitrary compression of temporal extent is what's different today. And that's what the technology gets you. Now, the things that the things about people that make them easy to manipulate, that's still the same. But now you can still get at them now at a level that you couldn't get at them before. So that's really the big difference. And that has real qualitative implications. But
right.
I would say that's what's different today.
Yeah. So you very carefully detailed all of that without using the phrase artificial intelligence. But wouldn't lots of people say that artificial intelligence is lurking behind everything that you were just commenting about?
No, it's not lurking behind everything. That's for sure. It is one tool in the toolbox, but it is certainly not the only one.
Well, what are some other tools that you would say are part of the thing that's changed in recent years?
Well, for example, the audience to do massive, the ability to do massive audience segmentation. That's not. I wouldn't say that was really AI technology that does that. It's just as an example.
Right.
Yeah. So it doesn't all come down to AI. First of all, what is AI technology? So that's really a sort of a loaded and a very vague term. In the 80s, I worked at the very first commercial AI company ever in 1983. And I can tell you that in the 80s, during the last big wave of AI, we had a saying. And the saying was, the moment the technology becomes mainstream, it isn't AI anymore. Okay, so the moment something becomes applicable and a commodity, it's not AI. That's how much we believe that many people believed in defining AI. So I could use the same kind of argument today. So I'm not hung up on AI. I'm more interested in specific techniques to accomplish specific goals.
Right.
So using the word AI is really useless.
There are lots of government organizations, military organizations that are aligning themselves towards solution sets in this information problem and adopting cognitive security measures. What do you think are some of the friction points that we are likely to encounter, from a geopolitical standpoint, from a societal standpoint, constitutionally? It doesn't take too long to start talking about, potential solutions when, you start running into third rails. Can you talk about some of the potential friction areas that you envision coming into play here pretty soon?
Well, the first thing is the data. Okay, if you're in the U.S. government, you're not allowed to actually monitor social media data. I'm talking about public data. I'm not talking about breaking into things or forget that, right? You're not even allowed to monitor publicly available social media data the same way that, for example, the Russians or anybody else in the world can do, or any kind of private interest in the U.S. So if you work at a government organization, on your job in your office, you cannot be listening to these things. If you go home, sure, you can do anything you want. You're not breaking into anything, and it's perfectly legitimate to do that. So the availability of the data to actually understand what's going on, that's the first big stumbling block. Okay, so that's the major problem. Second, suppose if you're going to do some kind of messaging, then the question always becomes, okay, well, who's going to decide what message you want to put out? Who's going to decide what message needs to be countered? Now, I don't actually believe in countering messaging. I don't believe in censorship in any form. I don't think that ever works. But what I do believe in is displacement. So if I don't like the story that the other guys are telling, it's up to me to tell a better story and make it more attractive to my listeners. Okay, so attractive that they abandon the first story. Okay, I don't shut it down. They just ignore it and they wander away towards my story. Okay, but then the question is, okay, what story are you going to tell and who's going to decide? And the problem is that actually requires some leadership in the government. And the one thing that we're unfortunately lacking in the government is leadership. And this is the same thing, if you go to Europe, you go to the European Union, they go so much out of their way to make everything as objective as possible. And it becomes totally bland and uninteresting. There's no content to it. You listen to it and then, okay, they're not willing to take a position. If you don't take a position, then, okay, then nobody's going to pay any attention to what you're saying. So the leadership is missing. So that's another big stumbling block. Who decides what you're going to say?
It sounds like a lot of it comes down to a marketing problem.
It is a marketing problem, and part of it has to do with what exactly is you going to market. If you're a business and you're selling a product, that's easy. You're going to do whatever you can to sell that product. But if you're the United States government or the European Union, what exactly is he selling? And who's going to decide how that comes across? So,
right.
And as I say, right now there isn't anybody.
Right. Well, selling freedom in the American way of life is not as compelling as it once was, or it's
it's too vague.
Yeah,
it's too vague. You have to make it. No, you have to do better than that. It has to be more detailed. It has to be something more that you can relate to more. You need characters in a story that you can identify with, where the emotional investment becomes overwhelming.
Huh. Yeah. I many years ago, I came across the teachings of a fellow named Joseph Campbell. He was I think a cultural anthropologist or a comparative religious fellow. He was kind of a big deal, I think, back in the mid 80s. But one of his assertions was that I think he was talking more globally, but I think it's applicable to this conversation as well, is that we need like a new story that resonates for our time, or kind of, based off of what you were just saying, find something marketable that resonates with America or the free world, and can be messaged legitimately and displace whatever other faulty messaging or counter messaging may be out there.
Yes, I completely agree with that. You have to have a good story, and right now we don't have one.
Right.
We don't have one. We don't have one that we don't have a good story, and we don't have anybody who can decide what that story should be either.
Right. So you're putting action to your words. Recently you and some like-minded colleagues helped to found the Information Professionals Association. I'm hoping you might be able to say a little bit about the background of founding that organization.
Well, the basic idea of it was to take the whole business of messaging and information and to put it on a more solid footing, and to help others to understand what's exactly involved. You want to make people aware of what the techniques are, what the methods are. If people are going to be being manipulated, it would be really nice if they understood exactly how they were being manipulated. We'd like them to be able to recognize that happening to them. So the information needs to be, the story needs to be collated, it needs to be organized, and it needs to be distributed. And that was really sort of part of the goal of the organization, to get people who are, talking to each other and discussing these things and sort of getting the words out.
Right.
And that's sort of the underlying purpose of the organization.
Right. And listeners can go to information-professionals.org and find out more information about this organization. Yeah. So, Dr. Waltzman, if we could wrap up, there's this podcast is designed for a very wide audience of laypersons, military information operations practitioners, government officials interested in the information problem, academics and researchers who are contributing to the knowledge on the problem. But so what are some good beginner books and materials that people can check out if they want to understand more about the information problem and propaganda, et cetera?
Well, the first thing I would recommend, there's a documentary called The Century of the Self. And it's 4 hours long, and you can see it on YouTube. Don't look at the shortened version. You have to look at the full 4 hours, and it is worth every minute of your time to sit and watch it. And one of the things that is really great about it is it isn't pushing it's not pushing a political agenda. It's showing you techniques. It's a focus on technique. How does things actually work? How do you do things? I mean, like, for example, when I talk about things, examples that I tend to use are not modern day examples, because people are emotionally invested in modern day examples, and it tends to cloud their vision and make them not pay attention to the point of the discussion, which is the techniques. So in this documentary, the examples that they are talking about are all old. So people are not going to be that emotionally invested in them. So it's really the focus on techniques. And it's a really beautiful exposition of it. The next thing, one of the main characters in the early part of this is a guy named Edward Bernays, who was considered to be one of the founders of the whole field of modern field of public relations. And in 1928, he wrote a book called Propaganda, a little book, just a couple hours reading. And after you watch this documentary, you should actually sit down and read this book. That's the next thing. Mm-hmm. And then I would recommend a book called a very recent book called Computational Propaganda, which is edited by Sam Woolley and Phil Howard. Phil Howard is at the Oxford Internet Institute, and it gives you a very good broad overview of how this whole business works. So that would be my recommendation to get started.
Nice.
The literature in the field is enormous.
Right.
And things are being cranked out like crazy at this point. So
right. Well, that sounds like a good stack of bedtime reading or viewing. We will provide links to those in the show notes. And Dr. Waltzman, we hope that you will come back onto the podcast sometime. There's plenty left to talk about as we continue to wade into this problem space and craft solutions for the free world. So I hope that you'll come back on again sometime soon.
Anytime.
The Cognitive Crucible is the only podcast dedicated to increasing interdisciplinary collaboration between information operations practitioners, scholars, and policymakers. To find out more about the Information Professionals Association, visit us at information-professionals.org. Please support our podcast by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review.